from Ray Lakeman, and I think everyone knows Ray quite well because he's a regular part of our group and always shares in discussions. Tonight, so a little bit more about Ray. Ray's actually been a computer programmer for large commercial companies and education organisations. And it's a little bit interesting because before he was a computer programmer, he was a teacher. You hear a lot of people who do something like computer programming and then they become a teacher. Well, he went the other way. He was a teacher and then he became a computer programmer for some time. But he also has an interest in the history of science, and that's been a long-term hobby of his, the history of science. And I guess of particular relevance tonight, geology, which is the study of rocks. So you go see a bunch of rocks and you go, that looks like this, or that looks like that's happened, or that looks like this happened. And I guess it starts as simple as that, and it becomes more and more intricate as you get into the different theories. Of course, it's all theories when it comes to rocks. But how that relates to tonight is we're going to be looking at how the rocks can be interpreted to support the Genesis flood account. And there are other accounts from other cultures as well, but particularly for us, we're interested in the Genesis one. So is that enough of an introduction?
Sounds good to me.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Yes, I've titled my talk Flood Geology, and there we go. The young earthers view the Genesis flood as the only catastrophe by which considerable change has happened on the Earth's surface. They're almost words out of a book by Charles Lyell. In 1830, Lyell published his book. It was called Principles of Geology, and it had a really long title, same kind of thing that Charles Darwin did. He had a long title on his book too. The long title is Principles of Geology, being an attempt to explain the former changes in the Earth's surface by reference to causes that are now in operation. That's a definition of uniformitarianism, the belief that you can explain all of the past in terms of the processes that you see happening today. And you don't need to have any special call for anything other than you could see happening today. The universalists, the uniformitarians controlled the field of geology for about 100 years. In his book, Lyell explains that repairs to the port of Verona in Italy in 1517, following a major earthquake, uncovered some large beds of fossil remains, and a vigorous debate arose across Italy as to whether the fossil beds there could be explained by the Genesis flood. One Fracastoro was an Italian to argue that the geology that they found could not be explained by the Genesis flood. On page 23, this is slide 2, I quote from Charles Lyell's book. That inundation, Fracastoro observed, was too transient. It consisted principally of fluviatile waters, whatever they are, and it had transported shells, and if it had transported shells to great distances, must have strewed them over the surface, not buried them at vast depths in the interior of mountains. And on page 24 in his book, he goes on to say this: the clear and philosophical views of Fracastoro were disregarded, and the talent and argumentative powers of the learned, like Fracastoro, were doomed for 3 centuries to be wasted in the discussion of this question: whether all the phenomena could be explained by the Noachian deluge, It had been the consistent belief of the Christian world down to the 16th century that the origin of this planet was not more remote than a few thousand years, and that since the creation, the deluge was the only great catastrophe by which considerable change had been wrought on the Earth's surface. I put my emphasis on a bit of that because I think it describes my position very well. Slide 3. On page 30 he goes on to say, "A sketch of the progress of geology is the history of a constant and violent struggle between new opinions and ancient doctrines, sanctioned by the implicit faith of many generations and supposed to rest on scriptural authority." As you can see, Fracastorius and Charles Lyell saw the Genesis flood as a small event with no credibility for explaining the Earth's geology, and Lyell regarded Christians and scriptural geologists of his day to be a stubborn lot who believed ancient doctrines and opposed new opinions. Lyell's book, Principles of Geology, is a plan for a new paradigm to replace the old paradigm of diluvialism. Charles Lyell led a revolution in human thought, and this revolution was directly linked to another revolution which followed it, Charles Darwin and the origin of species. And here's a surprising link I uncover for you directly here. In 1831, 1 year after his book was published, Captain Fitzroy was organising the voyage of the Beagle to South America. He gave volume 1 of Lyell's Principles of Geology as a gift to his gentleman passenger, Charles Darwin. I was interested to discover in Fitzroy's 1838 3-volume account of the Beagle voyage. He says he became a Christian on returning to England, and he recanted his earlier interest in the geological writings of Charles Lyell, and he also recanted his remarks to Darwin that the sedimentary features they saw could never have been caused by a 40-day flood. Fitzroy was now committed as a Christian to believing the Genesis account of the global deluge, and Darwin's mind continued to develop ideas that led to the origin of species in 1859. Next slide. The paradigms of geology. Diluvialism was the paradigm before 1830, and it was Charles Lyell who changed it. Also called scriptural geology, the view that almost all changes recorded in the Earth's crustal rocks resulted from the deluge, the Genesis global flood catastrophe in which God judged an evil world and rescued Noah's and the animals with him in the ark. Uniformitarianism was the next paradigm to overtake geology from 1830, and it lasted to around 1930. This is the theory that changes in the Earth's crust have resulted from the action of continuous and uniform processes that we see happening today. Uniformitarians require vast eons of time to explain the structure of the Earth's crust, and they oppose the diluvius paradigm. Uniformitarians religiously deny that any catastrophe ever happened, and they do it mainly in order to defeat diluvialism. Uniformitarians insist that the Genesis flood was a small event, and the Earth is very much older than the Bible suggests. Catastrophism came along in about 1930. This was a theory that certain vast geological changes in Earth's history were in fact caused by major catastrophes, that we do not see these things happening today. Catastrophists, they were called, were the new radicals who could see the evidence of catastrophe that was there all the time. And catastrophists slowly overcame the disciples of Charles Lyell but they still insist that the Earth is old and has millions of years of history between the catastrophes that they recognise. This is not now another paradigm to follow these paradigms, but flood geology, which I claim started about 1960 in a big way. Flood geology is not an entirely new paradigm. It's a resurgence of diluvialism, but it has less dogma and a lot more science to go with it. Flood geology is the theory that the geological history of the Earth can be understood in terms of a supernatural creation followed by one huge catastrophic event, the global flood described in Genesis. For me personally, I find the young Earth view is a better explanation of the real world we live in. Both old Earthers and young Earthers face objections that are hard to explain within their view, but I find the old Earth objections are the more difficult to explain when you take them all in balance. I admit that the Bible is an important piece of evidence in my view, so I sometimes ask myself, if I were to reject the Bible as my own evidence, would I still be a young Earther? It's an interesting question, of course, but I can't do that. I cannot honestly ask myself to do that. I am unable to reject the Bible. The Bible is part of my evidence and I cannot discount its influence. I do not believe that there is any evidence that will prove the Bible to be completely wrong in anything it says about history or science. So why should we consider flood geology at all? The Christians among us will want to ask that question, but so will the others. For Christians, a saving faith is available to anyone who calls on the name of the Lord Jesus under the conviction of the Holy Spirit. Most Christians agree that the inner witness of the Holy Spirit is the only necessary warrant for Christian faith. I believe that. Therefore, belief in a young Earth and in flood geology that I'm talking about tonight is not necessary to be a Christian. I believe this truth as well. But if someone takes that idea a little further and says it's not true that a young Earth view, it is not true that a young Earth view has no benefit or is detrimental to Christian faith. Rather, the contrary is true. If the young Earth view is accepted by a Christian, then they have another warrant for Christian faith. A Christian young earther has reasons to believe that the Bible is trustworthy from the beginning in Genesis chapter 1. Having a young earth view in addition to an inner witness of the Holy Spirit increases one's confidence in the truth claims of Christianity. Having confidence in young earth views could lead a believer to come to more could lead an unbeliever to come to faith more readily, or inspire a believer to share his faith more boldly and more readily sustain his faith through times of trial. Possession of a young earth view has many benefits for Christian faith. Therefore, I encourage people to be aware of flood geology. It can be a benefit to your faith. Scientists who profess no interest in Christian faith would also benefit from a respectful consideration of flood geology. For simply, it is a simple and consistent description of the real world we live in, and everyone should be aware of it. The young earth view is a very big and complex topic, and we will not try to answer many of its objections tonight. My hope is that we will gain a few insights about the Genesis flood tonight, in order that we may look upon the rocks of the earth's crust and be able to think, the flood does actually explain that. That's all I want to achieve tonight. Let's have a quick look at a few verses from the account of Noah in Genesis chapter 6. Starting at verse 9. This is the account of Noah. He had 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth. Noah had no faults and was the only good man of his time. He lived in fellowship with God. Everyone else was evil in God's sight, and violence had spread everywhere. God looked at the world and saw it was evil, for the people were all living evil lives. God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all people. I will destroy them completely because the world is full of their violent deeds. Build an ark for yourself out of good timber. Make rooms in it and cover it with tar, inside and out. Make it 450 feet long, 75 feet wide and 45 feet high. Make a roof for the ark and leave a space of 18 inches between the roof and the sides. Build it with 3 decks and put a door in the side. I'm going to send a flood on the earth to destroy every being that breathes. But I will make a covenant with you. Go into the ark with your wife, your sons and their wives. Take into the ark with you a male and a female of every kind of animal and of every kind of bird. And jumping to Genesis 7, verse 11. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. On that day Noah and his wife went into the ark with their 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, and their wives. With them were every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, and every kind of bird. The rain continued for 40 days, and the water became deep enough for the ark to float. The water became deeper, and the ark drifted on the surface. It became so deep that it covered the highest mountains. It went on rising until it was about 25 feet above the tops of the mountains. Every living thing on the earth died, every bird, every animal, and every person. Everything on earth that breathed died. The Lord destroyed all living beings on the earth, human beings, animals, and birds. The only ones left were Noah and those who were with him in the ark. The water did not start going down for 150 days. This reads like reliable history. Whatever other disasters may have taken place on earth, the Bible student must never marginalise the Genesis flood itself. Clearly, Genesis chapter 6 through chapter 9 exists to show mankind that God judged the world. God designed the flood, and he gave Noah plenty of time to build the ark, maybe 100 years even. The account appears to be written by Noah or a reporter with eyewitnesses to those events. The account is detailed with Noah's age and the duration of the flood stages in days. The language is not like an oral tradition or a legend or mythology. The Hebrew word mabel in the Old Testament and the Greek word kataklysmos in the New Testament are used only for the Genesis flood. Look at a concordance and see that there are many other Hebrew and Greek words which can be translated into the English word flood, but it's not done. The Bible only uses 2 words, mabel and kataklysmos. These are the words reserved as technical terms for the Genesis flood. We find many myths and legends of a massive flood exist in cultures around the world. But we should understand the Genesis flood, the account itself in Genesis, reads like a good historical record, and it is consistent with many Old Testament references and many New Testament references. In the New Testament alone, there are 60 references to the flood as real history. Here is one that was spoken by Jesus himself on slide 7. Matthew 24, 37 to 39. The coming of the Son of Man will be like what happened in the time of Noah. In the days before the flood, people ate and drank. Men and women married, up to the very day Noah went into the ark. Yet they did not realize what was happening until the flood came and swept them all away. That is how it will be when the Son of Man comes again. Young earthers have talked about a meteor impacting the earth for a very long time. A very, very large meteor suddenly striking the earth, bringing with it perhaps a large load of ice, could have provided waters for the flood, could have shaken up things and put a lot of energy into the sea to cause the violence that happened. For example, a man named George Dodwell, the South Australian government astronomer, appointed in 1909 and held that position until 1952. He tried to publish his hypothesis for a massive meteor impacting the earth as the cause for the Genesis flood. Dodwell gathered measurements of summer and winter solstices from around the nations and far back in time. His earliest measurement was in 583 BC, from the time of Pythagoras. From these measurements of the summer and winter solstices, he tried to show that the Earth's axis was tilted by a meteor impact in 2345 BC. That's a date he ascertained from the Bible with his analysis. He also hypothesised that the Pacific Ocean basin was the impact crater for this massive collision with the Earth. Now in 2013, a US astronomer named Danny Faulkner took this work of Dodwell's and recalculated it all and rechecked it all. There was quite a bit of data in Dodwell's work that he could not discover himself in his time. Dodwell did not give the trail for his information from Indian history and Chinese history and a few things like that. But Danny Faulkner did track a lot of his data, and he used his skills to recalculate the work that George Dodwell had done. And he came to the conclusion that it was not possible from that data to see that the Earth did tilt 24 degrees when that impact happened. He also did not see from that data that it was possible to choose the year 2345 BC as the exact year in which it all happened either. So Danny Faulkner can't find evidence in George Dodwell's work to confidently agree with the hypotheses that he came to. He says, though, he could not deny that the hypothesis happened, but he just couldn't be as convinced as Dodwell was. So Dodwell's work was interesting, and I came across it a large number of years ago, and it did interest me. The idea that the Earth could have been impacted by a very big, massive meteor. Young earthers have been interested in that evidence, and the idea has arisen again in recent times. So I want to look now at some interesting evidence in slide 9. Evidence that has become clear since 1960, and this is significant. Since 1960, we have had very much better pictures of our solar system, and a lot of things have been discovered that people before 1960 could not know, and these are all in that category. Many asteroid craters are found on the planets, on the moons, on the asteroids themselves. The asteroid belt as a body in our solar system is made up of a lot of fairly small objects. And when you look close at them, they've had a lot of strikes and leave a lot of damage on them. Much ice on planets and moons. Modern astronomers and scientists have been amazed recently to find good supplies of water ice on our own moon. They've found good supplies of water ice on the planet Mercury, and this was far from expected. Mercury lives very close to the sun and has very high temperatures, but at its north pole it is never gets sunlight. And there is in fact a large mass of ice on the north pole of Mercury. We'll see it soon. The asteroid belt. It's considered to be a collision of a large asteroid with an earlier planet that orbited in that position. Most of the material debris from that collision would have dispersed off in all sorts of places. But some parts of that collision debris have a tendency to form that stable orbit at that position, and they're still there going around the sun. There are ring systems around Saturn and other planets. The big planets have all got ring systems, and they're mostly made up of chunks of ice. Ice was considered as something that was volatile and wouldn't live very long in space. It vaporises and disperses. But there is a lot of ice in our space around us that has not disappeared by vaporisation. So perhaps they're not so old as some people think they should be. There's a suggestion that ice is an important ingredient of the impacting asteroids. So all the asteroid impacts we see on bodies in our solar system seem to supply a lot of water and ice with those impacts. Our moon. The near side of the moon has larger and fewer impacts than the far side of the moon. And Mercury, Mars and Moon, we can clearly count the asteroid impacts on those bodies today. And they imply that the Earth probably received the same amount of impacts from space as well, although there's not much evidence left of them on the Earth. And they imply 40,000 large impacts must have hit the Earth, because the Earth was in the same place in space where it all happened. In the subsequent slides I'll go into some more detail on this evidence. In slide 10 isn't it? Next one. Slide 10. Many bodies in the solar system have surface and subsurface evidence of impact, craters and debris. Many bodies that lack atmospheres, lack erosion, lack volcanic lava flows, still have an intact surface where we can count the asteroid impacts. When Mercury, Moon and Mars are compared, they have very similar crater densities. They have very similar crater sizes. They have very similar crater distributions. The number of small ones, the number of medium-sized ones, the number of large ones are very similar on all of these bodies. Slide 11. Many planetary moons and many asteroids are heavily created by asteroid impacts. There's two of the bigger asteroids, and you can see them covered with pockmarks from being struck by a lot of things from space. In fact, the very shape of some of these things are probably shaped by very large impacts with these rocks. When we see an impact, we can estimate the kind of energy that was involved in creating what we see of that impact. From that energy we can suggest a velocity and a size of the impacting body. They are guesses, intelligent guesses, but they're not precise in any way. Sizes of impacting bodies in the solar system are estimated to be about up to, the big ones, up to 100-kilometre diameter objects have caused the collision. One of them on the moon was even bigger than that. And the velocities of these impacting bodies is usually taken to be about 20 kilometres per second. Think about that. That's moving pretty fast, isn't it? 20 kilometres in 1 second. Slide 12. Water is being found where it was not expected, as I've mentioned already. Large amounts of ice have been found on Mars. Mars has a density quite a lot lower than the other terrestrial planets, and the reason it has a low density is now thought to be water. In the region of the North Pole, a very recent research was done with radar imaging and experimenting, and they found that the density of a very large region of the planet near the North Pole is a density of 1.2. Water has a density of 1. Carbon dioxide ice has a density of 1.6. 1.2 is somewhere between. It's less than carbon dioxide. It is thought to be water and a bit of other dirt in it. There's not much else it could be, and it's believed to be water. So a large part of Mars is in fact ice, water. I'll show you some closer pictures of these in a while. Slide 13. I'm going to focus on Mars for a while now and the water found on Mars. This is an impact crater on Mars, and it's not ice water in it, it's ice carbon dioxide you can see there. And around the fringes of the impact is ice carbon dioxide. It'd be nice to say it's water, but what we can say is that a little bit below the surface here, it is water. There's ice underneath that surface. Next slide, 14. You can see these look wet. The left-hand picture shows water channels on the surface of Mars. These features are extremely large. That crater in the bottom there is probably about 35 kilometres across. The next picture shows a very gloopy impact. It looks like it was mud that impact happened in, doesn't it? You can see the spludge that happened. And then after that spludge, the mud sort of settled a bit, and away from that mud, there are further water streams that have run away from it, aren't there? So the impact there landed on an area that has a small amount of ordinary rock material on the surface, and the impact melted a large amount of ice when it happened, and it threw up a very muddy result. Slide 15. This picture I obtained off the web, and there was a few pages of commentary from the astronomer who produced it. If we have time later, you might like to see what he said, but I'll try and say what he said a little bit quicker than that. I haven't got a lot of time. Down at the bottom right-hand side, you see a crater which is 32 kilometres in diameter. You can see that on the south side, which is the bottom side, there has been a breach of the crater ring of thrown up material, and it has been eroded away. The water has gone into the crater itself and filled it with sediment, and all the surrounding area is filled with the same kind of sediment by water. You can see little protrusions in the bottom of this water that's running along, has caused a sweeping motion up to the right, and you can see that those sandbars are shaped by moving water that was moving upward to the right. On the very left of this picture, there are a couple of quite eroded craters, that one and that one, and even some more if you look really closely. Those eroded craters over there were probably briefly covered by this water. And this level down over here, this was a stereoscopic photo, the difference in altitude from here to there is 1,000 metres. So that flow of water was 1,000 metres deep. And it flowed for a considerable time to move all that sediment into the pattern you see it there now. Slide 16, I think, is next. Before I comment on that one, I'll speak a little. The asteroid belt is thought to be the remains of an asteroid about 100 to maybe 500 kilometres in diameter, with a planet which was probably twice as big as that as well. And this is just another indication that the asteroids were big, energetic, and caused a lot of impact on the solar system when they passed through. So that previous planet that orbited between Mars and Jupiter is now a trail of rocks called the asteroid belt. And then this one we've got here, we're looking at the rings of Saturn. These rings are made of water ice and a little other material. And many people are suggesting that the age of those rings must be less than 5,000 years. We are already in our time seeing several of those rings decaying and slipping into the surface of Saturn. Quite a few of the inner rings have moved. I saw a measurement on the website the other day. A recent calculation has noticed one of the rings has moved 200 kilometres closer to Saturn in a period of only 3 years. They are really moving, and they're moving away. Those rings are getting less and less as we speak. They are short-lived, and they've not been there very long. The rings around Neptune and Uranus and Jupiter are there as well, but they have almost entirely disappeared. Only Saturn has a significant ring system remaining. The evidence points to water ice as a very important ingredient that was not expected in our solar system, and it's very likely it was brought here by asteroids in recent times. Slide 17 is a near-side photograph of our moon. You can see some huge asteroid craters there. Prior to 1960, geologists had a different paradigm. They did not want to admit to catastrophes in the history of our solar system. And they used to look at that and they said they are lakes of lava. They are oceans of lava. They're called mares. And the mares are supposed to be seas of lava. And they were thought to be generated by volcanic activity. And if you go back to books prior to 1960, you will find the astronomers and scientists saying there's a lot of volcanic activity earlier in the life of Moon, and most of the features on the surface were caused by volcanoes. Today we know that's all entirely false. There were no volcanoes on Moon, and there never have been. They are in fact impact craters. Large impacts will melt the rocks and make magma. It is not from a volcano, it's from an impact. And all of these features are from huge impacts. On the near side of the Moon, there are few impacts, and they are very large, most of them. If we look at the far side of the Moon now, it is totally different. On the next slide. For every one impact you find on the near side of the Moon, there are 32 partner impacts on the opposite side. If you count all the impacts on the near side, multiply it by 32, you will have a count of the impacts on the opposite side. This means that whatever event caused this impacting on the Moon it probably all happened in one rotation of the moon. The moon takes 28 days to rotate once. Whatever happened took 28 days to complete the pattern. Young earthers are very ready to accept that information, that those impacts happened in 28 days. I have read many accounts from old earthers, and I've never seen a credible explanation of why the moon had two different shaped surfaces. They don't have a good explanation of why. So that features in what I'm talking about tonight, but it's just raw scientific evidence at the moment. Slide 19. There's, if we go, back to 18. That's funny. Have I lost one? All right, forward to slide 19. 19 shows that the Earth did not escape asteroid impacts. I could show 100 photos here instead of 2, but I reduced it to 2 because I haven't got hours to spend tonight. The left-hand picture is a photograph from a space satellite. Again, we couldn't see this before 1960, but we can now see that there's a huge circular imprint in South Africa. This is a crater from an impact from space that happened before Noah's flood. There's been a lot of erosion to expose this pattern deep under the rocks of the Earth's crust, and that big circular impact is about 350 kilometres from side to side. It's huge. The depth of that crater is about 35 kilometres. It is a huge impact on the surface of the Earth. Currently, geologists are talking about 5 or 6 of these on the Earth, and there is mention that several other structures may be craters as well. We are discovering more and more of them. They usually have to be found using radar surveys, and our techniques of doing radar surveys are improving year by year, so we see more of these evidences in the crust of the Earth. The one on the right is a recent and small impact. The rock that caused that crater was probably 30 metres in diameter, and we have 180 of those on the Earth's surface that we can photograph today, from smaller ones to slightly larger ones than that. And I found about 15 of those photos that we're showing earlier tonight. Just put 2 in my talk. So there's good evidence around our solar system that during the history of our solar system and the history of our Earth, there have been massive numbers of meteor impacts from space, and I've called them asteroidal impacts because meteors is a slightly more specialist word. Asteroid just means a large object from somewhere in space. There's a problem for old earthers here. They recognise that large numbers of very large asteroids have impacted objects in our solar system, and they have impacted the Earth too. But if an asteroid of 100 kilometres diameter hits the Earth, it will destroy most of the life on Earth. An asteroid that large will kill half of the living things on Earth or more. And if they're happening more than once, if there's 10 or so of these impacts on the Earth, then there's possible 10 extinctions of life on Earth. And old earthers see that as a really big problem. How did life evolve and develop over long periods of time when these destructive, cataclysmic impacts were coming from space and destroying everything? Some people have suggested that evolution is so good it had to reinvent life many times after it was destroyed in the early days. God declared his original creation was good, and young earthers are not wanting to allow for disastrous impacts at any old time in the Earth's history. Nor do young earthers allow that life on Earth faced near extinction many times in the past. If massive asteroid impacting did happen on Earth in its history, then young earthers would actually like it to all happen during that period called the flood. Because God had actually prepared things for that event. He'd made a plan to save life. He had it all safely tucked in the ark on the far side of the world where the impacts couldn't get it. If you think about it, one side of the earth can remain quite shielded if the nasties are coming from the opposite direction. And over long periods of time, asteroids would not hit that opposite side of the earth. It would be safe. Safer anyway. So, a model for Noah's flood from a young earther needs a little bit of special pleading. And in slide 20, we get to our special pleading. This is what we need to make things work. We need a large cloud of asteroids, numbering in the tens of trillions. I've drawn this myself. I couldn't find any pictures to go for this. My asteroid body here, moving at 20 metres per second, is heading toward our solar system. It's comparable in size with our solar system, and it's coming mighty fast. It's got a mighty lot of objects in it, trillions, because as it flies through our solar system, it has very little effect. It can go right through it and hardly interfere with the solar system at all. A few objects will impact with objects of our solar system, and they will have an effect, but the rest of it will just pass on through without having much effect. I got out my best year 11 mathematics and calculated all these numbers through for myself while I was preparing, and worked out the size and shape and speed and velocity and volume and gravity and all sorts of things for these things. And I'll quickly run through a few of these things now. These objects travelling at about 20 kilometres per second will actually pass through our whole solar system in a period of only 6 months. This large body of asteroids, in order to be a stable grouping of matter, which does have some gravity of its own, it probably is a rotating disk. As we look around our universe, rotating disks are mechanically stable and will hold their shape and retain their shape for long periods of time. Like our own solar system itself is, I propose this asteroid impact body is a big rotating disk. I've just shaded it in some various shades of grey, not knowing much about its internal structure and not being much of an artist with my computer art package. I thought that was about as close as I can do it tonight. I did construct the solar system with careful scaling in mind. The 4 big gas planets are at those positions, and the green disk on the middle holds the 4 terrestrial planets, which are so small and so close to the Sun, I didn't have the ability to draw them properly for us. So Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars and the asteroid belt are in that little green spot, and the 4 giant planets are very much further spread out on the disk of the solar system. This cloud of objects that impacts the Earth could be about 30 or 40 astronomical units in diameter. An astronomical unit is 150 million kilometres and is the radius of the Earth's orbit. So an object about 20 or 30 astronomical units is getting up near the size of our solar system. It would take 6 months to pass through our solar system, but it would only take 1 month to pass the position of the Earth. So for a period of 1 month, we're in a position where we can receive impacts from that passing body. These impacting asteroids might have had differing compositions. Some may have had a lot of ice, some might have had material which can produce slate, sandstone, quartzite, layers of rock upon impacting with our Earth. The cloud passed right through the solar system with very little distortion, except that a very small fraction of its objects impacted with the objects of our solar system. The cloud continued on into space at 20 kilometres per second for another 4,500 years, and it would now be 9,000 astronomical units away from the solar system. It would now have an apparent size only very slightly larger than the planet Jupiter. And Jupiter is hardly possible to see as a planet with the naked eye. With any extra instrument you can clearly see it's a planet. If you were to look straight at this cloud of impacting asteroids, it would look very much, just a little larger than the planet Jupiter looks to us in apparent size. However, this impacting asteroid body doesn't need to have any light. It's dark, it's black. It's a very, very long way away from our sun. If you pointed a really good optical telescope at it, you wouldn't see a thing. It's not surprising we haven't seen it. But one day, somebody might see it. I wouldn't be surprised. I want you to allow this special pleading for a little while. This huge body of impacting asteroids. And I'm going to describe the flood again using it, as well as the Bible. God has persuaded Noah to build an ark. Slide 21 is a suitable backdrop. And when the ark is finished and loaded with supplies, God brings the animals, he calls Noah's family to enter, and he puts them all in the boat and seals the door. Then the rain starts falling very intensely, for on the other side of the earth, the asteroids have begun falling onto the earth's surface. They fall at a rate of 50 per hour for a month, for day and night. For a whole month, these things are pummeling the earth. One 20-kilometre diameter asteroid travelling at 20 kilometres per second strikes the earth with very little warning. You only see it for a few seconds and it's hit you. It punches a crater 30 kilometres deep in the earth, right into the mantle, the rocks which will be melted if you punch them like that. They will become liquid. It melts a lot of rock. It pulverises a lot of rock too. It turns much of the water of the ocean into steam explosively. It throws up a circular crater rim 1,500 metres high and 120 kilometres across. The impact debris of mud, rock, steam and water is spewed from the point of impact for as far as 500 or 600 kilometres. Molten rock at the bottom of the crater will rise quickly, only a few seconds after the impact, and it will fill up the crater again with molten magma. And that will return almost to the surface where it began. It'll be about a kilometre or two deeper than it was. An earthquake measuring 11 on the Richter scale will be caused at that place of impact. And a tsunami will race off around the oceans of the world. A very wet mass of unnaturally warm atmosphere will begin to roll away from this region to quieter regions of the earth. Powerful ocean currents of warm mud and rubble will begin streaming to quieter and deeper regions in the ocean. The asteroid strike is quickly followed by many smaller and a few larger impacts. It's a good thing that Noah had built his ark high above sea level, so as to avoid the tsunami destruction which is going on now on the other side of the world. Most forest vegetation is violently uprooted by powerful blasts of steam, silt and mud, and the vegetation and timber from those forests forms large floating mats on the floodwaters. For 4 weeks the asteroid impacts continue, and all this time the Ark is still on its building site, well above the tsunami destruction zone. NOAA reports the warmer and wetter atmosphere releases intense and continuous rainfall. The big floods that happened in Brisbane a while ago were produced by 2.5 days of rainfall. We're now talking about 40 days and nights of non-stop, really hefty rainfall. It's much, much worse than anything we've seen in our lifetimes. After it has been raining non-stop for a month at the Ark site, the other side of the Earth, where the asteroid impacts are happening, become fewer, and the impacts become smaller, and the tsunamis are weakening, and the asteroid shower slows. And after another 2 weeks, the asteroids almost stop. The rain eases to frequent heavy showers. The non-stop rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights, and then the water got to the building site of the Ark. The larger asteroid impacts on Earth now number more than 40,000 of them. Altogether, these impacts have added a volume of new magma, rock, sand, silts and muds to the Earth that have come to us from space. And if they were spread evenly to carpet the whole surface of the Earth, they would produce 400 metres deep of brand new rocks from space. But in addition to that 400 metres of new rock, each impact has stirred up large amounts of our current rock from the Earth's surface and added that to the mess that's happening. The impacts have added much water to the Earth as well, and strong currents loaded with abrasive gravels are eroding mountaintops and crater rims, and they're filling valleys and trenches and craters in the ocean floor. As well as the new waters dumped on the Earth causing sea level to rise, there is another important effect. The transporting material is flowing down and filling the deeper valleys and craters in the ocean floor. That causes sea level to rise as well. And after 40 days of non-stop rain, another 150 days of rain and rising water continue as strong currents do their work of filling craters and deep ocean regions. And there is yet another effect. Now the waters have covered even the highest mountains. The tidal drag of the moon's gravity is creating a super tide on the Earth, for there are no land masses above the water to stand and resist the tide that the moon is creating. Today we have small tides because of the moon limited effect. Halfway through the flood year, NOAA records that the water ceases rising and the rain stops, and then the water slowly begins to fall. This begins the second phase of the flood, when the resurfaced Earth responds to the massive redistribution of rock and sediment that it has experienced. In many regions, the crust has been thinned and is composed of denser basalt rocks which must subside to a lower ocean floor equilibrium. In other regions, the new sediments and magma rocks are less dense than basalt and are piled thick with debris and newly deposited sediments. These regions will uplift to create new continents as the world readjusts to the new distribution of matter on it. When the flood year is ended, Earth has been totally resurfaced, with new continents appearing and new oceans have been formed. After more than a year of cataclysm, the Ark comes to rest on high ground, and the rescued humans and animals wait till it's safe to emerge and repopulate a new Earth. Now, there's a couple of other things to summarise and then I'm finished on this story. The impacting and the vertical tectonic movement of the flood of the Earth after the flood has caused all this change give credibility to the enormous amounts of water of the Genesis flood, and also to the belief that the flood could deposit marine shells deep inside mountains as well as on the top of Mount Everest. Massive asteroid cloud impacting hypothesis is a sufficient physical cause for the flood without any other mechanism to cause it. And flood geology explains most of the crustal record of the Earth as a result of 1 year of cataclysm. Totally beyond the scope of what I can talk about tonight, but I should mention quickly. After the flood came one ice age. Young Earthers only believe in one ice age, and it can be explained by the flood. During the flood, the temperature of the ocean would have risen by 20 degrees or more above any normal temperature. The asteroid energy has increased volcanic activity, and it has ejected volcanic ash into the atmosphere to cool some continental areas. When the atmosphere is full of ash, there is a cooling effect that's very strong. In a period of maybe 100 to 200 years after the flood, the atmosphere is producing a cooling effect, but the oceans are unnaturally hot, and the atmosphere is just ripe to create an ice age. On the continents, there'll be huge deposition in cold regions at higher altitude, and at the sea surface there'll be high evaporation of water, producing heavily wet cloud atmosphere for moving the ice onto the land. The flood model can also explain an accelerated plate tectonic movement process on the Earth's surface, and the flood model can also explain the frozen mammoths as a freak weather pattern of the Ice Age. And that's about where I'm going to finish my story.
Well, so thanks very much, Ray, for all your work in preparing that. And now is the time to ask you questions, or even if they're the sort of questions that object, that's fine. I talked to a few people who had some yeah buts. You're allowed to share them as well.
Position of the continents. How does the position of the continents and any movements of them, and hence depth of the oceans, fit in your imagining of the flood?
Geologists talk about isostatic movement. If the Earth behaves like a plastic body with a slightly less plastic crust, and if a portion of the crust is overly dense, it will subside into the plastic interior of the Earth. So if the rocks are very heavy in a region, they will subside and go lower to form the bottom of the ocean. And if there's a lot of rocks that are lighter, they will in fact rise up.
Other than the fact that seems intuitively what you'd expect, is there evidence of that?
Oh yes. The rock that makes up the continents is considerably lighter than basalt, and the continents have a deep root of their rocks, as well as a body that's above the ocean level, sea level. Okay. And so you get that lighter rock appearing above and below. It's like an iceberg floating in water. 1/10 of it's floating above the water surface and 9/10 below it. Very like ice in water. The rocks do that. And when a large impact comes from space, it will spew rocks away from the impact position, and it will penetrate into the mantle of the Earth if it's a big impact, and the mantle rocks will rise up, and they are more dense. So that would not normally become a continental piece of the surface of the Earth. The material that makes the continents is made up of the debris and materials that settle elsewhere.
Sorry, in Eric's question, like the conventional theory is that the continents have been moving around like they had Gondwana land so many years ago, so the continents have actually been moving apart, like Australia was formerly connected to Antarctica or something like that. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah.
So where does that actually fit into?
Young Earthers don't disbelieve in continental drift. In fact, most of them are quite happy with it. But they would say that in the time scale of 6,000 years, there isn't much continental drift going on now. If you talk about a couple of centimetres in 100 years, that's very little consequence to a young earther. If you want to talk about continental drift, you need to talk about a much faster movement at some point in history. And many young earthers will suggest a theory of why the mantle was more fluid in the past and allowed more rapid movement of plates in the past. So they'll talk about an accelerated plate movement earlier on in the time after the flood that has now slowed down. So yes, your continental drift stuff all lives on for young earthers.
Does that answer your question, Eric?
Not entirely, but that's all right.
Well, can you re-ask the bit that's not answered?
Yeah. So I suppose some models with the global flood actually have the continents starting all together, because the continents look like they fitted together, or some of them do, and then which means they're all on one side, and we don't have, and so that means oceans are different. We don't have the same oceans as we have now. We don't have a particularly deep, probably don't have oceans as deep as we do now, but it's at the flood when everything moves around as well as everything else that's happening, and possibly the continents moving around is part of the whole chaotic system.
I'm no expert on continental drift, I think, but to me it doesn't seem much different for a young earther looking at it from an old earther. But the old earther person talks about the forces happening today are pretty much the same as the forces that happened long ago, whereas a young earther will say long ago there were much more rapid things happening, and today they're just about slowed down or stopped.
Then how do you explain the fact that there's the Andes, for example, are still being pushed up by this continental drift, and quite substantially, which that was a mechanism to explain why the hills have been formed rather than your view. So there are alternative views, or ways you explain it.
You used to work quite substantially. From an old earther's perspective, he's talking about millions of years, so in 100 years you might see a centimetre movement, perhaps. To a young earther, if you only get a centimetre movement in 100 years, that's virtually nothing.
In Chile, in the Andes, it's bigger than that, much bigger. Where I've worked, the gaps over 1 year are that wide, and then you can see the earth being pushed up.
Wow.
Inches, not centimetres.
Sorry,
they do. They're a metricated company, but countries in America as well, so they talk in their multi as well. But yeah, no, you can see the ground really move, and it's scary when you
sounds beautiful.
It is beautiful, yeah, and it's 3,000 metres up.
Yeah.
Is that a problem?
I don't see it as a problem for a young earther at all.
So how does that harmonise?
There's a few hot spots on the earth where things are moving quite rapidly still, but generally the continents, the plates are not moving relative to each other very much now. That's pretty true. Even though there are a few small spots where you see big things happening, across the whole Earth's surface you don't see a lot happening.
I would dispute that considerably, because there's evidence from Flood Geologists. You've got Southeast Asia pushing into India. You've got, as I said,
But how many centimetres in 100 years does happen?
It's still quite unstable.
It's still only a very few, isn't it? It's
No,
less than 10 centimetres
I'm
in
not
100
an expert
years.
in these areas, but Dinah might be.
See, as a young earther, 10 centimetres in 100 years is not unremarkable. That's okay.
So Diane, you're a geologist, is that right?
No.
Okay.
No, I just taught this plate theory,
You what, sorry?
I taught the plate theory.
Okay,
in
so
school.
tell us what you've taught.
Oh, well, I'm just saying that bit of America with San Francisco on, that's, you can see they've built fences and they've got sensors. You can see quite a movement in what was a straight fence, And you can see it's moving that way, north-west.
In the Pacific, middle of the Pacific, you've got the Pacific Ridge going along there, and and you may not believe how they work out the age of the rocks, but closer to this ridge, the rocks are younger than they are further out. And they use measuring equipment. They can see that it's still moving like so, and therefore that's pushing it underneath Japan, it's causing havoc somewhere else. But that's the new Earth being formed. Just about the Andes, so this is I think an interesting idea. Charles Darwin was over there, and he looked out in a little bay and started climbing the hills, and there was like a little island here and there, you know. And then when he's up on the hills, I think it started shaking. When he got down, the bay was littered with little islands that come up all over the place. And that's where he got the idea that the Earth's surface was moving, rising.
Kevin?
A few months ago, there was a debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye in America on basically a young Earth versus old Earth. A point that Bill Nye raised was if there was a global, if all the fossil records were due to a global flood being quite turbulent, why aren't all the fossil layers kind of mixed in terms of species? Do you get definite species in each of the layers, and they're kind of consistent across the Earth. So if there was a violent flood, why is it all scrambled up? Why is it kind of so uniform with specific species in specific layers?
I'll make a small attempt at this, but it's an area that I have a lot of questions in as well, and I'm certainly no expert in this. I think a lot of the time we are given to believe a sort of textbook story. Textbooks are not the place where you find scientific truth. They are the place where the whole picture of science is summarised for a student to have a nice simple view. And when you go to the real world that scientists work in, the picture is not as neat and tidy as the textbook says. And that's true in every field of science, in every branch. So if you want to find out what real scientists are playing with, read scientific papers and journals, not textbooks, is my advice. So we get given this picture that the fossil record is so neat and tidy, the oldest, most primitive are in the bottom beds, and the modern and youngest are in the top beds, and it's really clear that the young earthers are crazy, because it couldn't be that neat and tidy if young earthers had any sense at all in what they say. But in fact, when you go to the fossil in the real world, they're not that neat and tidy. They really aren't. Most fossil beds you find are what are called fossil graveyards. You go to the big dinosaur beds in America and you find a jumble of bones in a great pile. And you can dig dinosaur bones up one after the other for years and years and years in one little pile. And you don't pull out the bones to make a Tyrannosaurus Rex easily. You've got bones all over the place to sort out, and you hope you can find a set for a dinosaur called Tyrannosaurus Rex. Very occasionally you do find a Tyrannosaurus Rex sitting by itself, but mostly they're found in these graveyards, enormous piles.
I think Kevin was more referring to the maybe the shore-like fossils.
Yep.
And deposited by the sea, which are, I think you'd find an argument.
Yeah, so you're looking at like the bones
You said the fossil record, not dinosaurs.
The young Earth people explain that the flood had its, say, a hot stream of mud came from a new impact. It will flow down into the bottom parts of the ocean, and it will come upon colonies of life that cannot escape. The things that live in the mud in the bottom are the ones that are going to be in the mud at the bottom when they're trapped and fossilised by the flood deposits. And you won't find whales in those layers because the whales have swum off somewhere else. They're mobile. You won't find dinosaurs there because they're climbing up a mountain. They didn't get caught by those early flood disasters either. And as the flood disasters get worse and worse and get more and more universal, and they get higher and higher, and there's less land left for animals to hide in. Various groups of animals will get caught in disasters. And so they are separated off into marine animals and then other places where you find land-dwelling animals fossilised in great numbers, and you hardly ever get the two mixed. The marine dwellers usually don't get fossilised along with the land dwellers. They're in different places at different times. And the land dwellers are often higher up in the sequence because they didn't get caught by the first disasters of the flood. So there is a sorting in the fossil record that the young earthers agree to and explain why it happens. Now, how strong the old earthers' argument is, I am uncertain myself. I think there still are very difficult questions to answer, and they are very difficult. Once you agree that it all happened in a flood, doesn't mean it's easy to analyse what you find in the records and explain it. It's still very hard to do, and there are tricky bits. But the old earthers have the same difficulties. They find it very hard to interpret as well.
Justin, did you have something to say?
Well, I'll just give a brief summary of my understanding of how the younger flood geological record goes. Basically, I think 1950s when the Genesis record came out, the main theory was hydraulic sorting. So records were sorted according to like physical properties, how big the animal were, and stuff like that. Recent developments, maybe about 1980s, they've shifted to ecological zoning theory. So water also at the bottom of the record come from the ocean. Middle altitude habitats form the middle layers, and then like man and mammals form top layers. And I was saying that the young earthers have 3 different possible spots where they put the actual flood. The hydraulic sorting, which is like the ultra young earth creationists, basically the pre-Cambrian border, so all the sedimentary record is by flood. Then I think the second one, I'm not sure, but I think it's like the Ecocene thing, and some current young earth creationists put at the Cretaceous tertiary boundary. So where the dinosaurs put out, that's where they said all modern sedimentary records. So there's multiple theories in the young earth creationists.
Can I just ask, oh sorry.
Peter?
Well, just while we're talking about sorting of fossils, I'd like to throw in the issue of fossil pollen. Of course, pollen disperses very readily, and it's a very good microfossil to find, and yet the more highly evolved plants like your daisies and your grasses, etc., you don't find in these older sediments, and it's more difficult to explain that by sediment sorting.
So basically, the problem with the young earth creationist fossil models, they explain the animals because animals can move, but I think what I read is because plants are stationary, that's a bit harder to. That's where we have to.
Yes, but in terms of stuff like grass or daisy pollen, I mean, it's hard to find anywhere on the earth where daisies or grass won't grow at the moment, and yet we don't find those kinds of pollen in old rocks. And some of the pollen disperses incredibly well, like the Nothofagus pollen, can disperse for thousands of kilometres or hundreds of kilometres.
Had you heard that before? Have you heard that what Peter's saying? Have you heard that before?
Well, I've heard that basically because they don't find pollen in the Cambrian, in the very early rocks. Yeah. You've
heard that before?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, sorry.
On that issue, I'm aware of a very big controversy that happened some years ago when one particular scientist with the creationist bent started analysing a couple of layers in the lower Grand Canyon sequence, and he found pollens quite prolific in those layers 150 million years earlier than there was supposed to be any pollen on Earth. And a lot of people called him crazy and a bad experimenter because he was finding these pollens where they weren't supposed to be found. But when a lot of other people found pollens there too, the whole issue quietened down quite considerably. And now it's an anomaly that people don't like to talk about, because there are problems for old earthers as well when you start studying pollen. Pollen has been found in a very large number of places that it's not supposed to be found, including in ambers that are very, very much older than there should be any pollen on the earth, according to the position that biologists place its origin. Flowering plants are not supposed to occur before a certain date, and yet they do in many places.
Have you heard that before, Peter?
I haven't heard about the particular exceptions, but I guess what case I'm putting is that the whole stratigraphic model that actually relies on this is actually on a large scale consistent. So while we can argue about particular cases, I think the overall picture is very hard to kind of dispute.
But if there's truly fossilised pollen in rocks that are truly in the old Earth model 150 million years old, well then you've got an exception of one. You know, that's the exception.
We haven't proven anything because it's just hearsay at the moment.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's
it's just a hearsay. Unless you point us to where that scientific paper is and the debate around it is just...
Okay.
It's not hard to find this material. There's plenty of scientific papers that are highly controversial and very, very solid evidence.
But one anomaly doesn't destroy a fundamental truth. It just means that there might be another explanation of how that happened.
That's right.
Okay, it doesn't mean that the general theory is wrong. It just means that there's an anomaly that maybe needs another explanation. There's some mixing or something that's occurred later. Yeah, that's right. It's both sides of the argument. It doesn't destroy the general truth. Can I just ask the question? There's two things that concern me about the argument. Well, accepting that might occur, there are two things that are missing from the argument in my mind, and always, is what happened to the trees and the plants, and the great diversity of life that we've got couldn't have fitted on, that we have now, didn't fit on that ark. So what happened, how were they protected and allowed to repopulate?
So you've asked two questions.
Yes, there are two questions, but they're two related questions.
So what's the diversity of life?
I mean, the number of animals that we've got, the great variety of life in South America, North America, whatever, in my mind, couldn't have fitted on that ark of so many feet.
The young earther says that you only needed the breathing animals.
I'm talking breathing animals.
And how many times breathing animals?
And you only needed one of each kind, which was chosen to survive.
And the other things I'm arguing is where did the earth did the insects go?
Insects?
Thousands of them. Thousands of them.
Insects can live on water and stuff like
that. You can use that against that argument. But where on earth did they go? How were they protected? And how did they...
The floating mats of vegetation, which the young earther talked about in Noah's flood, can preserve a massive amount of life. Insects would have no trouble at surviving the disasters of the flood.
So your explanation of that is they weren't on the ark?
No, they were not.
Okay.
Well,
not breeding animals.
They were not dependent on what was on the ark.
How could you argue that the other argument then is how did so many animals who sloths and the like that finished up in South America finished up migrating from wherever they were off the ark to South America? So they could hardly walk, you know.
Well, that even raised the question of where the continents were at different times.
Yeah, that's right. I know, but I'm just saying the explanation as a whole at the moment, I believe.
There are difficulties both for old earthers and for young earthers in that area.
Yeah.
You're right. It's not easy. But I think a lot of things can move around a lot quicker than we give credit for sometimes.
That's not a scientific.
Do you not think that they had both up and now?
It is scientific if you study Sturtsey Island, for example. It's a new island that appeared in 1963, I think, or something. Scientists who studied it were amazed at which animals got there and how quickly they got there.
I'm talking sloths and things like that.
Well, sloths weren't one of the animals that made it to Sturtsey Island, I can assure you of that.
Yes, that's right.
It didn't cover that answer. But there are answers that come out of these tests that happen every now and again that are surprising. And
the other question then is, where on earth did the plants go? The trees and the forests that are now populated in great variety over the earth.
how did they survive the flood?
Yes. Or did God
They can float.
put them back again?
They can
afterwards?
float.
The seeds.
Reinvented them.
No, I don't think
Reading of the Bible, it seems to me as it says God made an ark, put all the critters on the ark to save the life of the earth. That's what it was. This idea that some of them flew away or swam away, or some of them were on rafters or something, grass or something else. It doesn't seem to me that that's what the Bible story says. It says they had to have that thing, and all the life was on that thing, that ark.
Well, you're not going to have large mammals survive a flood by floating masses.
Well, they starve for starve. So therefore,
So what did they eat when they got there?
That's right.
Well, they will eat their own,
But
eat their own.
God didn't put whales on the ark to preserve them. But
We're
then
not
he did
arguing
preserve-
about. We're not even discussing whales. Okay.
So I'm not worried that there are a lot of life that survived outside the ark. And
But it says
that's
every
good.
living thing.
Everything's
So-
breathing.
But the things that God did demand went on the ark were
Land
probably
got
pretty critical that they were on the ark.
But I'm saying, where did you store all the other people, the ones that did survive? Where did they
They
go?
were little lifeboats floating out the back.
That's what I'm trying to say, is that it's not consistent with what and it's just personally what I see of the world. It doesn't explain, to me it's trying to put God in a box and say this is what you did, whereas I'm seeing the variety and saying, well, I don't know. And therefore maybe the story of Noah's Ark is a story about what we shouldn't do, and like it's as Jesus said, it's an allegorical thing.
He didn't say
Jesus didn't say.
Well, he didn't. Not necessarily. Don't forget that at that time he was talking to people that had that view of the world. They weren't modern, they weren't. Yeah. Well, they were, yeah, for their time.
That's an interpretation a lot of people put on things, but it doesn't arrive straight out of the Bible text itself. It's an interpretation of that.
When it comes to all animals that breathed and stuff, I think we can, like often New Testament says, and all of their diseases were healed, and all of the people went after this, and it's an expression. So I guess it means, just about any animal you can think of, it was on there, and that's all it means,
I imagine that he probably took on all his farm animals and the animals that he needed to survive.
Well, the text is
Rather than
Where's the
no,
elephant?
but does it say giraffes? It doesn't, does it?
Where's the elephants come from? If it was just the farm animals, where did all the elephants come from?
No, I'm just saying that
Justin?
explanation of the destruction of the whole world is just out in my mind.
I'll offer one more comment. I'm not trying to answer questions though, but one other comment is worthwhile. Young earthers get surprised every now and again when they see evidence for rapidly adapting animals that change a lot, much more quickly than biologists would even allow. There have been a lot of incidents like that, where animals through breeding and through natural variations can change much more quickly than biologists give allowance for. There have been new species arrive in some animals that biologists have been astounded at how quickly it happened. And there is a theory of young earthers that while all these animals were living together in the ark for a whole year, there was a lot more exchange of genetic material between species in that close proximity.
What are you saying?
There's a method of viral transplant.
Okay, sorry.
Material out of one organism into another.
Right.
It's a recognised process that biologists would hope to use as a better method than mutation, because I know that doesn't work.
The laws against crossbreeding didn't come until Moses.
Okay. Justin and Peter both had something to say. Is it, we don't want to do like what we did last time and go like way over.
No.
So I know that Justin and Peter still want to say something. Are there other people that, yeah? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's go.
I read the Noah's Ark feasibility study a few weeks ago because one of my uni lecturers posted from animals that should be on the Ark, if it's correct. The Noah's Ark feasibility study gave it as about 16,000 genuses, because creation model puts it kinds as genus versus species. From the lecturer's slide, it's rough. The secular thing would be about a ratio of two species to one genus. So the secular numbers were double, but they were in species, so I couldn't compare how much what the secular genus count is. But that's what I'm saying with the creationists, what they've calculated to be. I'm not sure if it's correct or not, but that's what the numbers are.
16,000 kinds of animals.
16,000 genuses.
So it's certainly a lot more. It certainly blows out of the water the little picture you get in the Sunday school room of the bathtub boat with the elephant hanging off the side.
Boat, though.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and that feasibility study which I've seen, it does. It certainly does. Well, it shows you that it's feasible, I suppose. Yeah.
I think the problem that science has, for me anyway, is the complexity of the creatures. So today I was listening to ABC radio, secular mostly, and they're talking about snail. This guy was an expert on snails, and basically this creature is a slug that creates his own path. It can't move without laying a type of mucus that it slides on. It's like creates its own astroturf. That's how it was put. Now the complexity of that little thing, its science is matter, chance, time. I don't know if it's in that order. To produce that, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay. Yep. So who else? You did?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Yes.
Okay, me next.
Yep.
All
Sorry.
Well, thank you for your talk. It was very interesting and a bit different from something I've ever heard before. But I did have a question about some of the detail of it that I didn't understand. You were postulating, it was your postulation of what happened, and this asteroid disk that moved across the solar system. And you showed about the moon, how the moon's got different number of large asteroids on one side. That's very interesting, and small ones on the other side. So you reckon that it'll all happen in one cycle of the moon. But what I didn't follow was you talked about the Earth, the arc on one side, where near the current Mount Ararat, that area, the Middle East, and you reckon that all the big asteroids now struck the other side.
Yep.
But the Earth rotates every 24 hours. I couldn't understand how you said they all came that side.
It could have come from the bottom.
Well, bring the asteroids in from the bottom.
Okay.
There is a very large region of the Earth that's perfectly safe on the other side.
Oh, okay, even while it is rotating around.
Even though it's rotating every 24 hours, it doesn't make a difference.
Hey, isn't that great? We've had a question that's actually got a simple answer, and the question and the answer match.
Okay, now what about the moon? Does that correlate with the moon?
Because if it's coming from the south, then you end up with everything on the south.
Yeah, the moon's in
the moon rather than the far side.
Yeah, you've got.
Unless things are tilted since.
Those calculations.
You could have a difference on the south side of the moon and the north side of the moon for the same reason that I'm talking about the Earth being safe one side. But the moon hasn't got a pattern like that. The moon has got a side facing the Earth and a side not facing the Earth, and that goes around every month.
Yeah, I know.
Like that. The long agers who don't believe all this could happen in 1 month have to explain why did all the big impacts happen on one side and all the little ones happen on the other side. They have got no answer for why.
Well,
Wouldn't that be what you expect?
My answer is that the asteroids came in from a position so that the start of the asteroid shower was big ones and lesser of them, and one side of the moon got it, and later in the shower there were smaller and lots of them, and the other side of the moon got that.
But that doesn't fit in. The axis of the moon is in the same plane as the rest of the solar system. Therefore, that meant that it had to hit us not from the protected side that you're talking about, but we would have caught the same.
Well,
the
there's
Earth would have rotated into it.
probably a region of about 30 or 40 degrees where what you're saying will be okay with what I'm saying.
Yeah. Wouldn't you?
I haven't considered exactly where things come from in my answers to this, and I'd like to do so. It'd be fun.
Wouldn't you expect that most of the craters would be on the far side of the moon because they'd be attracted towards the Earth, so that they're going to hit the other side?
I drew up a scale model of the size of the Earth and the distance to the moon and things, and it's very hard to imagine how the Earth could be much influence over what hits the moon. The Earth is pretty small, the moon is pretty small, and they're an awful long way apart, and there's an awful lot of asteroids whizzing by. I cannot see that the Earth is going to have much impact on what happens on the moon's surface.
Okay. I've heard other things, but this is just an aside because we don't want to explore, but in the solar system, not all the planets rotate the same way. One of them rotates backwards.
Yeah.
I forget which one it is it Mars or Venus?
Uranus.
Uranus rotates backwards.
Uranus.
And their angle of tilt is they vary as well.
Neptune's over at almost 90 degrees.
Which so it could make you wonder, well, how did all that arise? But anyway, that's another subject. But thank you for what you presented.
It is fascinating, I agree.
Yes?
Well, I was just going to comment on what you said before about how how on earth you get the animals distribute throughout the countries and whatnot again. I think, well, from my understanding is that you're putting a very stupid stamp on the people back then, and that they don't have boats or anything like that, and they didn't have their own. I mean, you're assuming that a kangaroo, for instance, wasn't a domesticated animal after the ark, and that people didn't actually travel around with these animals, and they would have actually designed boats and whatnot, and they would have travelled. And I don't think that you're making the assumption that it's only the animals that are migrating, but I think that people would have also. I mean, how did possums get into New Zealand? It was people that took them into New Zealand. I don't see why there's anything wrong with the early humans after Noah's Ark doing the same thing with the animals as well, as they spread out throughout the world.
Phil?
Yeah,
I never heard no kangaroos mentioned in the Bible.
Oh, I mean, it doesn't mention a leopard either.
I think
Phil?
It doesn't mention a snake.
I think there's too much imagining in what you're saying, in my opinion.
To imagine that they're intelligent.
There's no science, there's just an imagining wanting to.
I think that's like plausible as an additional thing. I don't think it's the sole reason. Well, we've got the distribution that we have, but I reckon it's like.
But why aren't there kangaroos?
Quite easily components.
So they took the only kangaroos and went off, did they? Somewhere else. Or the only sloths.
They might come down here and they might not have become extinct.
All the lemurs headed off towards Madagascar.
Well, something for better in some environments.
No pockets of lemurs anywhere else, but they're all sat on Madagascar. So people just get the lemurs to Madagascar.
Alright.
There are possible estimations.
So we are.
There is no proof because none of us were there, and we're going to make up guesses what would happen.
We are going to finish up pretty quickly. Kevin?
Yes.
With this thing
Sorry,
about how you
Phil.
actually interpret the Bible, a lot of it seems to be on the assumption of a kind of verbal dictation model of the scripture, where kind of God told Moses, here's all happened, and he kind of writes it down. But you should actually take into account the Bible is written by real people, and so you should actually go back and try to work out what's actually going on. Like, if it say it was written by Moses, how would he know what happened back in Noah's time? People of a more liberal persuasion would give you another explanation. They would say there are a whole pile of creation and flood that's floating around in those regions.
In the waters.
And back along came the Hebrew writers, and they basically sanctified it. They actually took these stories and put a monotheistic say spin, it's probably a derogatory word, on those ancient stories, and kind of took the myths of the past and reinterpreted them within a monotheistic paradigm. So I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying that that's how a lot of scholars would look at the Bible and provide that as an explanation of where these stories actually came from.
Now, I know there are two people who are still really want to say something, and then that's it, okay? Because last time we were really
Can I make a comment on that? I've spoken to the cleaner. He's quite happy for us to lock up, and if we're still here at 9:15, he's going home. He doesn't care.
All right, okay. All right, sorry. Phil.
I was just interested in when you first started off with the geology and all the rest of it, and then you referred to the Bible as if this was evidence of the geology, and that sort of caught my eye because of what I think about the whole thing. And I'm just wondering, how do you say to a geologist who's looking at the rocks, the actual physical rocks, and you say, oh, but there's a book here that says something like that. How is the Bible evidence for what's actually there?
I have a high view of the Bible, I call it, a high view of Genesis as being historical.
And they're not going to have to ask why. Why do you have it?
And that's what I'm raising it for, I say why. I claim tonight that the Genesis chapter 6 passage on the flood looks historical. It doesn't look mythical. It doesn't look like it's been handed down for generations and generations. It's still got really careful details of 40 days of heavy rain, 150 days till it stopped raining, and so on. The measurements of the ark, these look very precise, and I don't think Moses invented them as part of I don't think he embellished some story he heard hearsay. I think they're actually reported accurately. And one of the things in the text that supports what I say is the appearance of toledos in the text. The Hebrew word toledos, it means a record, an account, or a history. And through Genesis, Exodus, so on, there are many toledos. And these toledos have a pattern which is a bit strange. And it's been understood now by a lot of people for a long time that they are references to an earlier written form of those texts before Moses wrote them. Moses wrote in a script language that they learned in Egypt. It's very similar to hieroglyphics if you go into the history of it and what we know about it. But the Hebrews came out of Egypt with a new handwriting, and so they needed to go to all their history and rewrite them in their new Hebrew text. Otherwise the people soon wouldn't be able to read their own history books. And in those prior history books there were tablets that were stored in libraries, and the tablets had names on them. Each tablet had a name, so you knew where to put it back in the shelf and where to get it out from. And the first one, in the beginning God made the heaven and the earth, it was known by everyone as the first one. In the beginning, Genesis, it's the beginning of their library, it was the first one. Later on it's got, this is an account of Noah, it's Genesis chapter 6 verse 9. This is the account of Noah. Either it means that Noah wrote that story, that was a tablet within that old library, or it means that someone named it as Noah's story, and it wasn't Noah himself who did it, somebody else did. But there were pre-existing texts that Moses wrote. This is why the scholars from Germany who were analysing the text in the 18th century found that the writings of Moses come from several different types, and they call it the JBDF scheme or something or other. There were differences in the text because Noah was using different texts to put it together. He had pre-existing documents. Moses did.
This is actually evidence in the science.
No, but it was asking Phil's question.
You take any of that stuff and go to someone out there in the big world and tell them about this is how it all came about. And look at it. The scientists are looking saying that somewhere somebody had a new language and started writing it down. They're miles apart.
Basically, it's saying that eyewitnesses reporting, so therefore how we interpret those eyewitness reports is another matter. There are eyewitness reports from the time that can be useful in interpreting what we're seeing. That's basically what it's saying.
I admit a lot of different people will have a different take on it than I do, and I'm not saying mine's going to be better than everyone else's either. But, how was I going to say this? The Bible, if you give it a high status, it ought to be consistent. And if you take a young earth view, like I've been representing, and a lot of people hold it, that it is a high view of the Bible, there is a high degree of consistency if you follow it. But even if you don't see that high degree of consistency and you see lots of variations in the way you see things, there is still at basic two claims of truth here. There's a truth that the materialist says there's no need for God, the world invented itself, we have to have evolution, we have to have millions and billions of years. And there's another basic truth which says God did it, and he didn't do it millions and billions of years ago. He only did it in quite recent times, as Jewish tradition would tell us. The Jews are quite clear that the earth is 6,000 years old. They will all tell you that. That's their tradition in their nation. They don't all believe it, but they know what the tradition is. And one of those traditions is basically right, and one of them is basically wrong, or it's the other way around, or they're both wrong. And both wrong is a very inconsistent view. I've never seen anyone write a good story for them both being wrong. They're usually saying one's right or the other one's right. And I just happen to go with the young earth one. I like it best. I've got lots of reasons for it, but I can't prove to anybody that I'm right.
Just a question about your model. With the 40,000 asteroid strikes in about 28 days, it might not be your model, but if they were to hit Pangaea, so it's like just one massive land continent, would that be enough to, I guess, start like catastrophic plate tectonics, like a starting mechanism or something like that?
Do you understand what he's saying?
I don't understand the problem. Yeah, I agree with you.
So there's different theories as to why the plates are moving, and I think your question is,
why the plates moved.
Could all those asteroids hitting the Earth be the reason for the plates moving?
I think that it was, yes. I think it was.
Okay.
I thought it was with convection currents inside the Earth, from the core of the Earth. It goes up, like in your piece and your saucepan, they go around. The convection goes up, hits the bottom of these big chunks you're talking about there, right? At the bottom of the continents and pushes them apart.
Okay.
That's the scientific view. And what I'm saying is the old Earth or young Earth, with respect, who cares less? What the scientists say, measure, they test it out, they check it out. It's not like
nobody's measured that.
It's not like somebody who's who wrote something.
That's a postulate. It's a postulate all the same.
Quick comment on that.
They measure the movement, but they can't measure
the
how
convection.
much is flying up underneath and the heat transfer and all that sort of thing. They can't measure that.
That stuff's theory, but whatever your theory says.
That's the mechanism for the movement of the continents.
Yeah.
But that's what moves the continents.
Most people have come across that idea, but behind that idea there has to be some driving force. Whether it's the continual heating of the interior of the Earth by radioactive decay, perhaps, or whether the flood conditions where the impacting bodies added a lot of energy to the Earth and took it away from the equilibrium and drove these things to happen, and it slowly become more stable since as things have arrived at equilibrium. I think there's various ways of looking at these, and the flood idea that happened quickly and suddenly in a really big way is a very interesting one, I think.
All right. Well, one thing I think that we found tonight is that it's an interesting topic, and there's much to discuss about it. And I mean, we at Reasonable Faith, we are a discussion group. We're not expected to come to a consensus on any of this stuff. Okay? And it's.
We all know.
Oh well, yes, that's right. We could end up with 15 different churches. So yeah. Anyway, so we're very grateful. We're very grateful for Ray bringing a presentation tonight, as we are when any of us do, and providing us this opportunity to have the discussions that we do. And I certainly learned a few new things tonight, and yeah. So thank you, Ray. And looks like Kevin's got.
There's some